Hi, and welcome back. Now, I thought it was time to do another video because my friend AK did a video the other day, and in his video, I think he did it yesterday, he was talking about in-laws and outlaws and uncles and things, and it reminded me of a story that I thought I'd share that's quite an amusing story. Now, for this story, some of you may not know because it's not something I sort of go around telling a lot of people, but my lovely wife Nikki is actually my second wife, so I've been married twice, as has she, and it's not an ideal situation, but sometimes these sorts of things, it is what it is, and there's not a lot you can do about it. So, and that's the case here. But so the story I'm going to tell is actually about my father-in-law from my why is that not? Oh, there we go. That's better. From my first marriage, so my first wife's father. So most people that why did that not work? Hang on, sorry about that. Most people that are married have in-laws, of course. Well, when I was married, I was actually friends with my father-in-law before I even met my first wife, and I was friends with him after that marriage fell apart as well. So he was a very, very nice guy. I got on very, very well with him. But where most people would have a father-in-law, I had a father-outlaw. And the reason he was a father-outlaw, and he used to say this about himself too, so he had a very, very good sense of humour, is that he was in prison. And the reason he was in prison, I'm just going to redo this corner here, is because he worked there as a prison chaplain. Okay, now, an interesting thing about getting this job as a prison chaplain is that when he got the job, it was on a 2-year contract, and they were going to discuss it with him at the end of the 2-year period to see if they were happy with him in the job he was doing, and also to see if he was happy working there and wanted to continue it. So he was taken on as a prison chaplain on a 2-year contract, and he used to tell me the story about how at the end of the 2-year time period, they never actually got around to having a meeting with him to ask him whether he was enjoying the job and whether he wanted to continue doing it. But he continued turning up every day, and they continued paying him. So he ended up working as a prison chaplain for 20 years. But they never ever actually got around to discussing with him extending this 2-year contract. So when he met people, if they asked him what he did for a living or something, he'd always say, "Oh, I'm in prison." And that would he loved to sort of leave people absolutely gobsmacked, not knowing what to say next. So then he'd say, "I got sent away for a 2-year sentence, 20 years ago, and I'm still there to this day." And this left people, of course, absolutely gobsmacked. They didn't know what to say, and eventually they might come up with something like, "Oh, where did you work before you went to prison?" "Oh, I was a pastor at a church before I went to prison." And of course, some of the looks that got was absolutely hilarious. So, yeah, where everybody else has a father-in-law, I had a father-outlaw because he was in prison because he worked there. But joking aside, though, for a minute, he once told me a story from his job, and it really, really made me think, because I know in New Zealand, and the stats are probably very, very similar in the States, I don't imagine they're a lot different, but in New Zealand, there's something like a 60% recidivism rate. So if you're in prison, when you get out, there's a 60% chance you'll be back at some point. Okay? Now, as someone who's never been to prison, you think of it as, well, if 60% of the people that end up going to prison end up in prison again, obviously you're not rehabilitating them very well, and prison is completely and totally failing as a system. He said, in reality, that's completely the wrong way to look at it. He said, in a way you're right. Let's say, for example, you went into a classroom at school, and statistically speaking, 60% of the children in that classroom were going to end up in prison at some point. Then you would rightfully say, well, there's some absolute failures in the system here, and we have to make some huge changes. We said, what you've got to realise is this 60% recidivism rate is of the people already in prison. So what we're saying is, of the people that have first of all already decided to break the law, and break the law in some way that's reasonably serious, so it could end up in a prison sentence. We're not just talking about a bit of speeding or something. We're talking about something serious that's going to end up with a prison sentence. So, of the people that have already decided to cross that threshold and to break the law, okay, and of course, once you've broken the law once, it's probably a lot easier to break the law again because you've already crossed that that line, as it were. See, of those people, and bearing in mind that these people also, having had a prison sentence now, they all have a criminal record, which means none of them are ever going to get a job of any that involves any level of great trust or anything ever again. So they've severely limited any job prospects they've got for the future. And yet, of these people that have already decided to break the law and already done so, and already been caught, and already lost everything, and basically completely ruined their chance of ever having anything, any great job in the future or anything, we're still managing to turn 40% of them around. And so 40% of the ones that have already made all these wrong decisions have actually managed to turn their lives around afterwards. And you said, so when you look at it like that, and instead of as a 60% failure rate, but look at it as a 40% success rate out of 100% of people that have already failed, as it were, then all of a sudden it actually doesn't seem so bad after all. So, yeah, I thought after AK's video, I'd tell that little story about my father outlaw. And I must admit that I've always been one for, I suppose, not being necessarily 100% truthful about my job. Never ever outright lying about it, but just not necessarily describing it as quite the way that one should normally. So I remember when I was in my early 20s, I was living in Whanganui, and at the time I was working at a model shop. So this is a shop that sold, the plastic kit set models by Tamiya and things like that. The kit set models you can buy and you paint them up and you glue them all together. And I was working sole charge in a shop that just sold these plastic kit sets. Now, the church I was going to up in Whanganui, we decided that some people in the church would go on a little mission trip down to Wellington, to one of the churches there, and the church in Wellington was going to send some people up to Whanganui, just to get sort of like a taste of the mission field without having to go to the great expense of travelling overseas. And so I decided to take this opportunity to go on this little mission trip down to Wellington to see what I thought. So I was one of about 12 people that came down to Wellington from Whanganui for a weekend as like a miniature mission trip. Now, of course, the other 11 people that came with me all knew who I was because they all went to the same church I was going to. They all knew that I worked in this model shop up in Whanganui. Anyway, we get down to Wellington, and at the very first meeting sort of thing we were at, they got us all to stand up and tell us a wee bit about, say a wee bit about yourselves, your name, what you did for a living, whether you were married or single, and just, that sort of thing. So when it was my turn to stand up, I stood up and I said, my name's Russell, and I run a modelling agency. Now, of course, the 12 people that were down there with me all knew exactly where I worked, so they all knew full well that although this wasn't technically a complete and utter lie, I wasn't just lying through my teeth, didn't quite perhaps give the true story still, based on what I said. But for whatever reason, and I still don't know to this day, they all decided to play along because they thought that sounded quite funny. So when people asked, so what does Russell really do? They said, he told you, he runs a modelling agency. And it turns out, I wasn't down there to try and pick up women or anything, and so I wasn't making any attempt to do so. But I'll tell you, turns out that would have been an absolutely brilliant pick-up line had I wanted a pick-up line, because all weekend I had, all these teenage girls going up to me and things and asking, do you think I'd be, enough to be a model at your agency sort of thing. And of course, because the shop I was working in, sole charge, was selling plastic kit sets that you glued together and things, all I could really say was, I don't think you've really got quite the look that we're after at the moment. Saying it very nicely, so I wasn't making them feel awful or anything. But that was a very, very funny thing. And another job that I did once a very long time ago, and that I described in perhaps a not completely realistic fashion, was that I was working at McDonald's at one stage. And I don't know how many of you know this, but the full name of McDonald's is actually McDonald's Family Restaurant. So when I worked there, I used to describe myself as a chef. And people who didn't know better were quite impressed by this. People that did know me quite well would say, Russell, why do you call yourself a chef? I said, well, think about it for a second. I work at a restaurant, McDonald's family restaurant. I work at a restaurant and I'm paid to cook food. So how would you normally describe someone who works at a restaurant and is paid to cook food? So they sort of said, oh yeah, okay, fair enough. Again, it's a real stretch of the truth, but it's not an out-and-out lie. It's just a complete stretch of the truth to the absolute maximum that you could really stretch it. But yeah, I always enjoyed kind of exaggerating what I did for a living and things. And I've got to be honest, even to this day, like especially amongst men, like if you go to a men's group or something, okay, a very, very common way for men to kind of, when they're meeting and they don't already know each other, to try and get to know each other a wee bit, is to ask each other, so what do you do for a living? And I actually really, really hate that as a introduction thing. And the reason I do is first of all, if a guy's in a job that he doesn't really like, but it's what he's doing at the moment, then it's an answer he might not want to give. Also, if someone's out of work at the moment, then it leaves them in a very awkward place answering that question. And to be perfectly honest, asking a guy what he does for a living, most of the time, I won't say absolutely always, but most of the time, doesn't actually end up telling you anything about the person anyway. So I prefer to say to a person, so what do you do for a hobby or when you have spare time? Because, well, it does kind of backfire in a way asking them that, because people are so used to being asked what you do for a living that when you ask them, so what do you do for a hobby or in your spare time, sometimes they might answer with something like, oh, I'm a plumber or something anyway, and you sort of say to them, so that's your hobby? Oh, no, sorry, that's what I do for a living. Say, okay, so what's your hobby? So, and the other, so I think that asking someone what they do for a hobby or an interest actually tells you a lot more about the person most of the time than asking them what they do for a living would anyway. And secondly, the reason I like that question better is because even if you've got someone who's very, very shy and doesn't like to talk to people they don't know, you get them talking about a passion of theirs, a hobby and an interest, and they very quickly start to open up simply because they're talking about something they're very, very passionate about. So yeah, I've always believed that, especially as I said, it's especially prevalent amongst men. You get a bunch of guys together that don't really know each other, and that's how they like to introduce themselves. But I always go with the question instead, so what do you do for a hobby or in your spare time? Because I just think it's a much better question to ask someone rather than what they do for a living. But that's the story I was really wanting to share in this video. I have got one other little thing I'm going to share very quickly, so I'll just finish this row. Because I was talking to AK the other day about what I'm building with Lego at the moment, so I've taken a couple of photos and I thought I'd just share that. This around here, I'll just finish this little row here. This farm that I'm on at the moment, which is Arley Farm in Ireland of course, this, I must admit, has gone from being my least profitable farm to my most profitable farm, and the whole reason it's done that is because I forgot when I started playing it how I had intended to play this farm. And I had been playing it the same way I play my other farms, which is not the way I set it up or intended to do it, and I'd forgotten about what my intention was when I set it up. So this farm has although it is a dairy farm still, and like I'm only mowing these lawns to here to make silage bales for my cattle. Okay, so it's definitely still very, very dairy focused, this farm. This one has fewer dairy cows than any of my other farms, and therefore, now bearing in mind I'm paying 1 day months at the moment, okay, so the amount of money I make in 1 day is also therefore the amount I make in 1 month. This farm, because I've got very few cows on it, I'm actually only making $5,000 a day, or $5,000 a month on this farm, so it's barely making any profit at all. And of course, the thing is, when I designed this farm, the idea was I was going to do an awful lot of contract work. So I've got this whole map is pretty much grass, and I've got all the mowing equipment, so I can do contract work. And yeah, so when I remembered that, I started doing contract work. I went from being my least profitable farm at only making $5 a day to I can make up to about $40,000 a month quite easily. Now, to give you some idea of what I'm talking about, if I go down here, one of the paddocks that's still regrowing since I picked up contract on it is this paddock here. This paddock is a reasonable sized paddock. If we go to the map for a second, there's paddock 14 there. So you can see there's a decent sized paddock. I got 75 silage bales off that paddock. In fact, that one was so big I actually ended up using the equipment that they offer you, because of course when you go to pick up a contract job like that, you see, you can use their equipment or use your own. I normally try and go for ones that are offering $10,000 or more. So like that one there, Field 19, is offering $10,700 odd at the moment. If you use their equipment, then you'll pay an extra $789, so you'd make a fraction of $10,000. In actual fact, you'd make more than that, because when you do one of these mowing contracts, you've got to take the silage bales down to where they want them, but they normally only take about 80% of the silage bales to fulfill the contract. So then the last 20% of the silage bales you can sell, or you can keep them for yourself. Now, I always sell them because I use my own paddocks to make my own silage bales, so I actually end up making a bit more money by selling the extra 20% of silage bales that I made at the same time. So taking that contract, I probably end up making $11,000, maybe $12,000 from that contract, and I can quite easily do 1 or 2 contracts each day, as long as it's a day that there is grass contracts out there. So in the winter months there isn't. So yeah, let me just go and save now, and then I'll show you these pictures that I was going to, that AK wanted to see as well. Now, I'll just quit here. So I've started building very, very miniature scale in Lego, just for something a bit different. Well, there's 2 reasons I started going even smaller than normal. One is because it costs a lot less money to build it then, and the other is it takes up a lot less space, and I'm forever running out of space. I'm going to show you my latest builds. Where are we? What did there say? So this, if it'll come up, here it comes, here it comes. This is a little Volkswagen microbus. Well, in this case, it's a microbus. Now, so you can see just how tiny it is. Here's the same microbus again with a Lego minifigure standing next to it. So you can see just how tiny that little minibus is. I've also built some minions, which again are exceedingly tiny. So there they are next to the minifig, give you an idea of the size of them. And Wall-E, which again is very, very tiny, as you can see. So that's the ones that I've been building recently. Just some really, really tiny stuff like that. I just thought I'd share that with you, but this video has now been going on for almost 20 minutes. So I should call it a day now and let you all go back to whatever you're doing. Thank you very much. Bye.